Hello, and thank you for joining today's webinar. This series is a monthly webinar highlighting a product that we know will enable our partners to work quicker and more efficiently. I am Jane Kacharzik with Panduit, and I will be facilitating this webinar. Just a little housekeeping before we begin. This webinar is being recorded. It will be available soon on demand, and registrants will receive an email when it becomes available. All lines will be muted during the webinar. Following the webinar, there will be a question and answer session. Please feel free to submit your questions utilizing the chat box on the GoToWebinar app. We will answer as many questions as possible today in the time provided. Today's webinar on 28-gauge patch cords will include an overview of the products and teach you how something so small can make such a big difference. Today's presenter, Cherie Santamaria, is a product manager for Panduit's enterprise business. She joined Panduit in 2014 and has worked managing our fiber and copper products, most recently copper patch cords. Cherie received her bachelor's in electrical and electronics engineering from Karunya University in India and a master of business administration with honors from Loyola University in Chicago. Cherie?
Yep, thanks, Jane.
Sure.
So good morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Cherie Santamaria, Product Manager for Copper Patch Cords at Panduit. I'm very excited to be presenting on 28-gauge twisted pair cabling, an interesting solution that's gaining popularity in the structured cabling market today. Panduit is one of the pioneers to come out with 28-gauge or smaller diameter cords early on, and is the market leader that offers a full range of 28-gauge solution that includes RJ45 jacks, plugs, unshielded and shielded patch cords in 28-gauge solution. So what is 28-gauge cable? How does it differ from other cables? The one main advantage, as you can see in these pictures, is the size. These small diameter cables have been very popular in the market for a couple of years now because they easily solve many of our TR room and high density space installation challenges. These small diameter patch cords are constructed with 28-gauge solid or stranded conductors that allow for a smaller cable outer diameter and a tighter bend radius. There are many manufacturers offering 28-gauge patch cords in the market today. It is likely you may have heard them referred with different names. This picture displays the size difference between 24-gauge and 28-gauge for each of the different categories. As you can see, 28-gauge cable is less than 50% the size of regular cable. These cable diameter values are what Panduit offers today. Most cords in the market are about the same size, plus or minus some values listed here. Not all manufacturers offer all three categories like Panduit does. So from its inception, 28-gauge cords have captured market share at a faster rate, and this is because of its smaller size and main problems it solves in TR rooms and data centers, like capacity, easier cable management, and lower costs. We will now see some most common applications of 28-gauge patch cords and what's driving the acceptance of these cords. The most popular application, what we see in the market today, is direct switch patching, as we call here within Panduit. We see our customers immediately getting excited on seeing the flexibility and cost savings of this application. Direct switch patching is nothing but directly patching your switch to a patch panel using 8-inch 28-gauge patch cord without any use of horizontal managers, as shown in the picture. The benefits of patching this way is immense and solves many challenges that installers face today. There's better port number visibility, increased airflow and cooling because of the small size of 28-gauge cords. You get to reclaim your additional rack space by eliminating horizontal cable managers. It does not stop there. By eliminating these managers, you save the cost of these managers, cost you pay for longer patch cords, and cost for extra labor time. Finally, you save a lot of money and time when it comes to maintenance and troubleshooting. Imagine how easy your moves, adds, and changes will be. Another common application that we see for 28 gauge cards is in high density spaces. As the demands for high-speed enterprise networks have increased, the need for high-density installations in spaces such as wiring closets, equipment rooms, and data centers is higher than ever before. High-density patching using conventional patch cords and panels is inadequate for current demands of a commercial environment, even with ample horizontal and vertical patch cord management systems in place. Many of you may have experienced how difficult it is to route large diameter cards through vertical manager fingers. You almost must push or squeeze it in to fit between those fingers. Well, 28 gauge cards greatly help with that problem. It helps again with port number visibility, easier card management, better airflow and cooling, no congestion while routing cables through manager fingers because of the smaller size of the cables that adds to smaller bundle sizes. Smaller bundle sizes mean easier routing of cable through the fingers. In the picture, you can see the white cables on the left are 24 gauge and the blue cables on the right are 28 gauge. You can see how clearly the bundle sizes differ and how well 28 gauge cords sit in a tight space. Finally, we have also heard many customers adopt 28 gauge because it is more aesthetically pleasing than the bigger cords. So now that you have seen two major applications for 28 gauge cards, let's talk about things that we must keep in mind while deploying these patch cards. First, we'll learn how to calculate the channel length while using the 28 gauge cards. 28 gauge cards does not support the full 100-meter channel length like a 24 gauge or other gauge cards do. Bandwidth 28 gauge cards have a derating factor of 1.9. The highest I have seen in the market today is about 2, but recommend that you check with whatever cable manufacturer cards you use. But what's the derating factor for 24 gauge? 24 gauge cards have a derating factor of 1.2. 28 gauge cards have 1.9. The higher derating factor of 28 gauge cards is driven mainly by the smaller size of the conductors used in these cards, which tend to have higher attenuation. What does it mean in terms of channel length restrictions? Well, the first channel is a full 100-meter channel with 90-meter horizontal cable and 10-meter of 24 gauge patch cable as mentioned in TIA standards. If using 28 gauge patch, then the derating factor limits you to go only up to a 6 meter of patch with the fixed 90-meter horizontal cable length with a total channel length of 96 meters. On the other hand, if you want to maintain 10-meter patch while using 28 gauge, then you can run only 83 meters of horizontal cable with total channel length being 93 meters. Some of you may wonder how we calculate these channel lengths. Well, it's using this equation or formula that TIA recommends in terms of calculating channel length limits. All you need to do is plug in lengths of cables that you're using and their respective derating factors. The result you get from the left side of the equation must be less than or equal to 102 meters. Let's go through some examples, right, with two connector models for simplicity. So this example is the one that we saw in the previous slide with 6 meters of 24 gauge patch and 90-meter horizontal. You can see how we solved that equation to attain the max length of 28 gauge cords. You can also use a simpler method by using the Panduit derated app pictured on the right to calculate the channel length limits quickly. Kindly note the app is designed to accommodate Panduit offering and derating factors only. Now let's say you want to run 80 meters of horizontal cable, 15 meters of 24 gauge patch to work areas, and use 28 gauge patch in your TR room. How many meters of 28 gauge patch can you run for this scenario? Plugging in the values as shown and solving for X, the answer is 2 meters. total channel length comes to 97 meters. Now, can you think about subtracting 5 meter on your 24 gauge patch length and adding that 5 meter to your 28 gauge patch? No, it doesn't work that way. The channel length adds to 105.3 meters, which is greater than 102 meters as proposed by TIA. The app shows you clearly the additional length options available for each type of cable. You either have to sacrifice close to 4 meter on your horizontal cable, or 3 meter on your 24 gauge patch, or 2 meter on your 28 gauge patch. I hope this gives you an idea of how these channel lengths are calculated and how to apply channel length limits for different cable types. Of course, the 28 gauge cords have some limitations in terms of derating factor being higher than a regular 24 gauge patch, but the immense advantages that you get with these by using these cords overshadows the 4 meter or 7 meter you lose in terms of channel length. So like I said, you're free to download the Panduit Derated app to make it more simple in calculating lengths for your different scenarios. So moving on to another topic of concern when it comes to 28 gauge cords, PoE. There are a lot of false information in the market that these cords do not support PoE. Well, it also depends on the quality of the cords you buy. If you choose to go with a cheaper cord, I cannot guarantee that it will support, but as long as you go with a reputed manufacturer and also our Panduit patch cord, 28 gauge patch cords, absolutely work with power when bundled properly and run for distances within length limits. So 28 gauge cords absolutely work with power when bundled properly and run for distances within length limits. What do you need to be aware of? There are bundle sizes that Panduit recommends for Panduit cords when running PoE on 28 gauge cabling at 20 degrees Celsius ambient temperature. I've also shown the bundle sizes for 24 gauge cords to give you some perspective. Greater than 100 cables per bundle for PoE or PoE plus, and smaller bundle size for PoE plus plus. Because of the smaller conductor size of 28 gauge cords, they tend to have somewhat high resistance, so they dissipate more heat compared to other cords, and that's the reason we recommend smaller bundle sizes for these cords. So 48 for PoE or PoE plus plus, PoE plus, and 24 for PoE plus plus to allow better airflow and heat dissipation. How did we come out with these recommended bundle sizes? These cables were tested according to the TSB 184A guidelines. We measured the temperature rise in the center of the bundle and aim to limit temperature rise to less than 15 degrees Celsius from ambient temperature. Result is that all gauge of cables work, meaning 22 to 28 gauge, all gauges work for PoE applications within derated length limits and have different bundle sizes depending on the gauge of the cable you use. So we'll now talk about the standards compliance of 28 gauge cords and work done by the TIA TR 42.7 task group. So as some of you or many of you might have heard, the new ANSI TIA 568.2-D standard was published yesterday. I think the TIA committee and the active personnels in the community have already received their copy of this new standard. So 28 gauge cards, because of the rapid market adoption of these cards, even the standards community has adopted these cards into the new standard. So the TSB 184A-1 will have guidelines for supporting power delivery for these 28 gauge cards. The numbers that we saw earlier as regards to bundle sizes in the tables is specific to Panduit cards. So wait for this new standard and Let's see what directions they have for usage of 28 gauge cords. In conclusion, I request you all to remember the following facts about 28 gauge cords. 1, it is less than 50% the size of the regular cabling. 2, it greatly helps to solve TR room and high density layout challenges. We did talk about various cost savings upfront during installation and operationally in the future. 3, you need to be aware of the channel limit and PoE bundling restrictions these cords have when compared to regular 24 gauge twisted pair cabling. Finally, 28 gauge cords are standard compliant as of yesterday, the new standard that was published very recently. And that brings me to my end of my presentation. Thank you all for joining this call and your interest in these small diameter 28 gauge cords. Please feel free to send me your questions, and I'll transfer it over to Jane.
Thanks, Cherie. We will use this time to answer questions. Please feel free to submit your questions utilizing the chat box in the GoToWebinar app. We will answer as many questions today in the time allotted. Okay, I'm going to give it just a minute for some questions to come in here. Okay, we did get a request if it was possible for us to share this PowerPoint. That would be okay, correct, Cherie?
Yes, we can share this PowerPoint.
Okay, so I will go ahead and send this, anyone who is registered for this call, I'll go ahead and send them a copy of that PowerPoint. Let's see if we have any other questions here. It looks like we have a question. Our first question is, what is the minimum length of 28 gauge cords you can use in a channel?
Okay, so this is a question that we get most often from some of our customers, thinking, the shorter the length, they'll have issues with the return loss and things like that. So our minimal length that Panduit sells is the 6-inch 28 gauge patch cords. So we have tested them in many scenarios, and we have used them in PoE and other scenarios, and we do not find any issues with our card. So what I can guarantee with Panduit cords is that you can use our 6-inch patch cords anywhere in your channel, and it should be okay.
Perfect. Looks like we have another question that came in. Where else can I use 28 gauge patch cords?
Okay, apart from these two common applications like the direct switch patching and the high density layout usage for 28 gauge cards, I see like our customers using it in varied places. Like for example, in a workstation, from the outlet to your computer or laptop. People even have started using 28 gauge there because it's thinner, sleeker, and better looking than the bulky cards. So it all depends on you. There's no restriction as to the performance and the performance and any other technical factors with the 28 gauge cards. So you can go ahead and use it as long as you keep it within the derated length limits and the bundle sizes. It's very similar to using the other gauge patch cords.
Oh, great. Looks like we have one more here. Can I terminate 28 gauge cable in field?
Okay, so yes, you can do that. So Panduit offers 28 gauge plugs. We offer 28 gauge jacks. So it is possible for you to terminate it in the field, but what I would recommend is buying the 28 gauge patch cords off the shelf, because since these conductors are really thin, it needs quite a level of practice to terminate the 28 gauge patch cords in field. So if you have a skilled personnel, yes, go ahead and terminate it in field. But if not, I would suggest like buying it off the shelf.
Okay. Looks like we have another question that came in, Cherie. It says, does the jacket keep memory?
Um, okay, so it depends. So no, by memory, if you're if you're referring to if stiffness, no, it depends on different manufacturer, right? So our bandwidth patch cords do not keep memory. It certainly has a level of that exact level of little bit of stiffness because it helps the cords to be arranged properly, and it stays that way. Whereas some, if the cords are very lanky or very flexible, we have seen problems with the cable dressing, where you dress it one way and then the cable slacks and it doesn't look good. So bandwidth patch cords have that level of exact little bit of stiffness to them, so it stands the way you want in a certain dressing or in a certain scenario.
Okay. It looks like we have had a request too to share the spec as well. We can also include that when we send out the PowerPoint. Okay, it looks, Cherie, like those are the last questions here. I wanted to thank everybody for the questions, and to please remember to join us on our next webinar, which will be featuring our new AV products. The webinar will be on October 16th at 10 a.m. Thank you all for your time today, and you have a great day.